Our 3 Cents is part of the Greenlit Podcast Network. For more information, please go to greenlitpodcasts.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of Our 3 Cents, a podcast all about marvellous video games. My name is Jonathan Dunn and I'm joined, as per always, by my 2 friends, Chris Dow,
Lilac Wars,
and Minty Booth.
Lilac Walls.
And this week's super special bonus episode it's a real treat for us as we're chatting with a legitimate video games industry legend. We are thrilled to welcome to the show the one and only Giles Goddard. Welcome, Giles.
Lilac Walls. Thank you for having me.
So, for any losers that aren't familiar with your name, Giles, they will certainly be familiar with your oeuvre. Some of the games you've worked on are, just a few small little games you might have heard of. Star Fox, Super Mario 64, 1080 Snowboarding, Doshin the Giant, Steel Diver. Most recently, the virtual reality spiritual successor to 1080, Carve Snowboarding. What a CV. What a CV you have. We can't wait to pick your brains about, literally all of it.
Thank you. I actually forget what I do, what I've done most of the time. So I have to just look at my wiki page to sort of keep updated. So if there's weird pauses, it's probably me Googling what I've worked on and stuff.
So we start, as we always do with our guests, and ask you, what are you currently playing? Is there any games you've played recently that you would recommend?
Yeah, I recommend Carve Snowboarding because it's all I've been playing for the last couple of months. But having said that, I do play a couple of iOS games, and especially I've been playing a fantastic game called Infinity Pinball recently. I don't know if you've played it, but it's great fun. It's a kind of a retro, sort of old school pinball game. It feels like you're playing an old Game Boy pinball game. Great fun.
Ah, yes, I've just had a look at it now. It is downloading onto my phone.
Kirby's Pinball Land.
Oh, Kirby's Pinball was a great game.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite games, I think. It's got definite sort of 8-bit vibes.
Pinball games seem to work so well on phones as well. It's such easy, simple controls. You can't get it wrong, really.
Made by a fellow Brit in Tokyo, actually, called Hawking.
Ah. So, let's take it back to where it all began for you, which is Argonaut Games. And I'm going to hand over to Chris, who is just, smarter than me and has a much deeper knowledge of video games history. So, Chris, why don't you give us a little intro about Argonaut Games?
So, Argonaut Games were a very big name on the Super Nintendo, especially. And as far as I understand, when you were there, Giles, Argonaut were creating the Super FX chip that would go on to power games like Yoshi's Island and things like the technically oppressive but pretty miserable to play Doom as well. But most importantly for today, the Super FX chip would power the Argonaut-developed Star Fox and Stunt Race FX. And they're both games that make the humble SNES appear a way more capable machine than it actually is, by way of the chip itself sort of crunching a few numbers below the hood to pump out proper polygon models on a machine that really wasn't in the business of producing them normally. I wanted to ask, for the time, what was it like working on sort of bleeding edge home technology like this, like something very new that was going to really change how sort of 16-bit games looked?
I joined Argonaut when I was really young. I quit school early, didn't do my A-levels. I finished my O-level. You probably don't know what O-levels and A-levels are. But anyway, there used to be like before you go to college or uni, whatever, you do some big tests. And I didn't. I quit those early. Went to London to work for Argonaut because they were making 3D games, 3D sort of wireframe games at the time. They just finished Star Glider and they were working on Star Glider 2. I don't know if you know about those games, but basically Star Glider was like a wireframe sort of homage to the early Star Wars arcade machine. Brilliant Star Wars arcade machine. And that was all done by one person, the boss, Jez San. And I was so impressed with that, and I was really into 3D as well. So I wanted to do filled in 3D, actual polygons. They had a game, Star Glider 2, which was doing that. So I said, I need to go and work for them and work on that. So I showed them some stuff, got an interview and got accepted, whatever. Argonaut were always working on the cutting edge of sort of 3D. All of the time they were, it was their main thing was, cutting edge 3D. Yeah. So it was kind of a natural thing to move on to the FX chip, because they tried some 3D on a non, just a raw NES, because we didn't have SNESs at those times. And it was clear that you could do it, but there was a horrendous frame rate. So it would need a DSP or some kind of some help on the hardware front. So Jez went to Nintendo and said, well, we can do 3D, but it's going to require a chip. And this is how you do 3D on a NES, whatever. And then, that went on to the sort of the SNES. The Nintendo said, well, we've got a new piece of hardware called Super Nintendo. And that's where, the idea was to basically add a DSP chip for that, which was the FX chip.
I mean, it's really interesting because there's real limitations of hardware, and by using something like the DSPs on the NES or kind of the Super FX chip on the SNES, it's just trying to circumvent those limitations, essentially, isn't it? I mean, when you were working for the Super Nintendo, did you have to make any concessions still during development to kind of get Star Fox up and running as the team wanted? Or were you kind of building the chip to spec?
The entire thing was a concession. The entire game development was a concession because it's a sprite machine. Basically the SNES. It can draw lots of sprites really well, move them around, and it can draw a couple of BGs. One of them it can rotate, mode 7, whatever. Yeah. But it certainly couldn't. It certainly is not designed for 3D. The architecture is just completely different. So, everything was basically to try and design around the SNES almost. Yeah. Or to design stuff as separate from the SNES as possible and then feed it back into the SNES, you know what I mean? Yeah. So there was no sort of bottlenecks happening anywhere.
Star Fox, as I imagine anyone who listens to this show will know, it's a lovely little rail shooter. It's got branching paths, flying through rings, the whole sort of gubbins. But admittedly, in 2021, the frame rate is perhaps a little bit lower than modern players may be used to. But I think the game itself is still really engaging. And we're very fortunate these days. You can play Star Fox as well as the cancelled and then later revived sequel Star Fox 2 on Nintendo Switch Online. So I would recommend people give them a go. Just if you haven't played them before, it's good to kind of have context. But in developing Star Fox, what were the priorities for the team with that game? Like, was it about still being a fun experience, or was it purely a technical showcase first and foremost, and then everything else was kind of second?
That's quite a good question, actually. I mean, it kind of both, really. We knew we wanted to make a game that was different than, all the flat 2D sprite games. And we wanted to make it a game that was designed for 3D rather than, just sort of converting a game to 3D. Mm. So it was kind of both at the same time, really, I think. Yeah. It was a way of showcasing what this new chip could do, but also using the chip as a tool to make a cool game, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, following Star Fox, Stunt Race FX is maybe the lesser known of the kind of Argonaut developed SNES library. It's definitely got its fans, but it's a title that's largely just been left back on the 16-bit machine outside of like little cameos in Smash Bros and things like that. And yet I think it's a really enjoyable racing game. The Super FX chip helps render proper 3D tracks. You've got polygon racers and it feels really weighty. And perhaps some of this comes from, again, not trying to shit on the technical achievements of the time, but it does have a reduced frame rate, so it's got kind of just a heaviness to it.
That heaviness wasn't intentional. Basically, I mean, this is similar to Star Fox, actually. So we start off with just basically a ship or a car, and then you have the flat ground plane and nothing else on screen. Yeah. And it plays really fluidly. It's like 20 frames a second, which at that time was super fast. Now, obviously, it's kind of laughable, but at the time, 20 frames a second was really smooth. So you design all the dynamics and everything to move at 20 hertz, 20 frames a second, without really thinking about what frame rate independence was. Frame rate independence is basically designing the physics to move at any frame rate. Yeah. It's kind of taken for granted nowadays, but at the time, it was very much... This is what you can do in a frame, and your frame rate. It's either going to be 30 or 60 or 20 or whatever. So you just find your target frame rate and then design for that. Yeah. So the target frame rate for Stunt Race was 20 frames a second. So I designed the physics for that, and it felt really nice and smooth. And then at some point, more and more stuff went in. It went down to sort of, I can't remember what the next one after 20 is. It's like 16 maybe or something. And then went down to 13. It got really low at some point. So when you crash into the wall, all your parts sort of fall apart and then go back together, and it feels really sort of gloopy and and a bit sort of, well, heavy, yeah. That wasn't actually intentional. It was supposed to be more elasticy.
Yeah.
Faster feeling. But some people in Nintendo actually like that gloopiness.
I think it does work in a weird way, because it's obviously it's running on kind of limited hardware compared to what we know now, but it does give it a really unique feeling, because the other hits of that era that may be more fondly remembered, so you've got Mario Kart, you've got F-Zero, they're both very slidey games. And you can really tell, I think, when you play them a lot, that they're games that are having to work with their hardware tricks, like the Mode 7 kind of scaling that you mentioned earlier. And to be honest, you could take the ships from F-Zero and just plonk them down in Mario Kart, or the other way round. And I think only real diehards would notice that you're playing a different game, because the limitations of the machine mean they're both built on such similar mechanical footing. Whereas Stunt Race, because it's being rendered in 3D, it's completely its own thing. And it has that sort of chunky knockabout quality where it just felt different. And like you say, some of that does come down to it being kind of the frame rate dropping as you're kind of putting more on screen. But I think it has a personality that wasn't really present in a lot of other, pseudo 3D driving games of the era.
I do get that, but at the time, your number one enemy at the time, being a programmer, is the frame rate.
Yeah.
Every time you see the frame drop like that, it's like this horrific thing, and it's not a good feeling. Seeing your game run slow. So if you're not a programmer, it probably looks, it's kind of unique and nice, whatever, but as a programmer, it's not nice to watch.
I mean, goodness knows what the developers of a game like Faceball 2000 would think. I mean, I often cite Faceball 2000 as a reference point, which, if anyone hasn't played it, it was a first-person shooter on the Game Boy. And, I mean, genuinely impressive that it's running, but it literally runs at about 3 or 4 frames per second.
It was more like a slideshow. Wasn't it?
Yeah.
I remember that.
Great music, though. Great music.
Yeah.
I mean, because Stunt Race was like a follow-up to Star Fox that came out afterwards, was it any easier working with the Super FX chip now that it was kind of, codified? It was something that existed that you'd worked on already? Or did that kind of lead to just everyone pushing for too much in Stunt Race, and that kind of what then, caused kind of the technical limitations again on top of what the SNES might have been struggling with?
Well, it was definitely easier because the FX chip had been made, developed and finished.
Yeah.
And it was set in stone. Yeah. When we were making Star Fox, you'd write, a lot of the time we were using dev kits that were running half the speed of the actual final chip.
Yeah.
So it was very hard to sort of get the feeling of things because everything was running so slow. And also there was lots of hardware bugs in it, just really gnarly bugs where you'd write a piece of code and sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. Or it would work kind of, but then fail, which is, from a software point of view, that's really hard to work with.
Yeah.
Because you kind of lose, you don't know whether it's your code or the hardware or whatever it is. So it was easier than the fact that we didn't have any of that sort of baggage making it. But then again, it was slightly harder because people were expecting more from the chip this time round, so more textures and more polygons and more this and that, and a split screen. Don't you remember I think there was a split screen mode.
Yeah.
Which is, pretty horrendous to try and do with that kind of chip. Split screen on a normal SNES with sprites and BGs is basically free.
Yeah.
Because sprites and BGs, they're based upon scanline timing. If you can say, draw these sprites for these scan lines, draw this BG for these scan lines, it doesn't really matter how many splits you have in the screen. But for 3D, you're having to sort of draw an entire scene and then put it into the actual hardware frame buffer, and then draw another scene, put it into that. So it's a really big job for a chip like that.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine then, or I presume that it was a lot easier when you started being able to work on the Nintendo 64 as kind of a step up from the SNES. I mean, Minty's got a few questions he was going to mention about kind of those days, I guess, the projects you worked on around that time for Nintendo as well.
Yes. So, Giles, you became one of the first Western programmers to be sent to join Nintendo working in Japan, which must have been quite exciting for you. How did that come about?
Well, I mean, that was part of the Star Fox thing where we were just sent over to work with Nintendo. Originally it was for a few months, and then it turned into 6 months, and then a year or whatever. And I just stayed around stayed on at Nintendo, became a full-time employee, whatever. But yeah, I think at the time it was all just quite new and exhilarating, and I didn't really know what Japan was at the time. I thought it was just from country in Asia. It was extremely naive, I think, at the time.
I've been to other counties. I know what East Anglia is like. How different can it be?
Yeah, I'd been to Birmingham, I think, and I thought that was exotic.
And one of the things that is often, I guess, pins to your name is the Mario face intro in Super Mario 64. Just a fantastic, fun and silly little bonus that saw you able to grab and sort of distort Mario's 3D visage into all manner of different monstrosities. I imagine that something like that would start out as maybe a bit of a tech demo. How did it end up in the game?
So we were given SGI workstations called Indies, which were fantastic little sort of mini supercomputers. They had a sort of web camera that you attached to your monitor, and it was the first web camera I've ever played with, and I realised that you could sort of program a thing to sort of take the screen and modify it and detect what was happening on the screen. And I thought it'd be cool to sort of do a motion capture type thing with my hands or whatever. So I was trying all sorts of things, and one of the things was just using ping pong balls as a way of fluorescent ping pong balls to sort of detect positions on the screen. So I did that, and it was quite cool. And I was also working on some other tech, which was things like IK, inverse kinematics, for bones, and skinning, which is the sort of the mesh around bones for polygons, because up until that point there wasn't any sort of skinning in 3D games. So, I thought it would be cool to sort of make a face that was controlled, a skinned IK-based face, which was controlled by these balls. So, I worked with Koizumi-san to sort of make a little Mario prototype, and then that was it. Basically, Miyamoto just walked past around one day and thought, that's cool, why don't we put it in the game? And that was it. Very, very, very quick and simple.
That's amazing.
So, one of the other things that's often follows your name when you Google it is 1080 snowboarding on the N64, which was a huge success. It was the start of a franchise. How did that game come about?
So I think that was part of the IK kind of stuff. I thought it'd be cool to have characters in the game that were animating programmatically. So rather than canned animation sequences, I could sort of have the IK sort of move the character to make it as realistic as possible. So I had a character go down a ski slope. It wasn't a snowboard, it was just a character on some skis, I think. But all the things like the movement of the knees and the bouncingness and the falling over and everything, that was all sort of programmatically animated. But it was extremely difficult to sort of make it look not crap.
Yeah.
The arms would just flail everywhere, and you'd get into all these horrible situations. So it was kind of a bit of a dead end. But I did think, we could use some of this, like the knees, whatever, use it for like a skier or a snowboarder or something like that. And I just started snowboarding at the time, so I thought, let's go with snowboarding. But Miyamoto, because he was a skier, he wanted to do skiing.
Ugh.
So we had this kind of...
That guy.
We have fisticuffs. Yeah, we had fisticuffs for a while. But I managed to convince him that snowboarding was better, because with snowboarding you could do sort of jumps, it's like skating type thing. Whereas the skiing was really old school and really old fashioned and kind of boring.
Yeah.
So he kind of knew... He saw that the way to go was like the skating sort of trick, crazy side of things rather than the boring old sort of just normal skiing. So I won that.
Well done. Well done. I mean, obviously there were a few other extreme sport games starting to come about. Obviously there was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which was on the PlayStation. Over on the Saturn, there was Steep Slope Sliders, which is obviously another snowboarding game, which I'm pretty sure nobody else played.
It's really good.
I've just remembered that, actually. I totally forgot about Steep Slope Sliders. Such a weird name, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's not easy to say.
As a weird piece of trivia, Steep Slope Sliders is made by a company called Cave, who pretty much only do shoot-'em-ups, like bullet hell shoot-'em-ups, and that's almost the only game they've ever developed that isn't a shoot-'em-up.
How about that?
No idea why.
I mean, Steep Slope Sliders is incredibly impressive to run on a 32-bit console. But I mean, what did the N64's increased power offer to sort of expand on, this little burgeoning subgenre of extreme sports games.
It had nice pixels. You know, the PlayStation had lots of pixels, and the N64 had nice pixels.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be facetious or anything, but that was the thing. It was basically you had two options with 3D. It was either you're going to go for quality or quantity.
Yeah.
Sony were going for the quantity, and SGI were going for the quality.
Yeah.
Because SGI were renowned for their sort of film work, whatever. So they knew the importance of lighting and texturing and nice texturing and stuff like that. So I think the difference between the N64 and all the other ones was the fact that the pixels were nicer.
As a way to, as a perfect segue to bridge the gap to the next generation of Nintendo hardware, there was Doshin the Giant, which started out as an N64 game, and then you were involved in porting it over to the GameCube. And Minty, you're going to tell us a little bit more about Doshin the Giant, I believe.
Yeah. So games like Animal Crossing wouldn't come to the West until the N64 title was localized and then spruced up just a little for the GameCube. There was also Cubivore, which was a weird action-based life sim thing that had you romping around as sort of these square approximations of different animals. That was also in development for the N64 and was completely MIA until a GameCube release, although it has been in the news this week that a prototype build of the N64 version was found and dumped online.
It was, yeah.
And then there was Doshin the Giant, a game that launched as a 64 disk drive exclusive, Nintendo's sadly doomed N64 expansion that aims to bolster that machine's capabilities similar to the Famicom disk system. Doshin is a very weird game that incredibly has a second release, including one in Europe for the GameCube. One of its original designers apparently described the game as Populous meets Mario, and that is about as succinct a description you can afford a game as willfully strange as this. You're a big yellow giant, and you can terraform the environment to support groups of settlers who reward your kind actions with love, and they can also give you hate as well, I believe, and turn you into a red version of yourself called Jashin the Giant. The teeny villagers might make requests of you. They're a yellow elastic deity. They might need shelter from natural disasters. It's a very, very hands-on take on the god genre. Now, you, Giles, were the lead programmer tasked with moving this strange title from the N64 to the GameCube. What was your reaction to the game first and foremost, and what is the porting process like?
Well, I didn't actually end up porting it. I just made it from scratch because I looked at the code and I looked at the difference between the N64 and the GameCube and just thought, oh, bleep this, I'm just going to do it from scratch.
Oh, fantastic.
So that's what I did. I don't think I even considered sort of actually porting it, but I think that was good because I don't think it was a very good game on the N64. Technically wise, I mean, and that's not to diss the people that made it, but just I think it could have done with a rewrite or a rethink about how it all works. And that's what we kind of did. So it definitely wasn't a port. It was more of a sort of Doshin 2 type thing. I think we used some of the same graphics, but not a lot. I think it was just me, Ida-san, and Kure-san, the three of us. You know, it was before I'd started the studio, so I was sort of freelancing from home and just sort of sending ROMs to Nintendo every couple of days. It was a very weird kind of setup. Literally sending ROMs via sort of courier type thing because there was no other way of sending it, no internet.
Yeah, goodness me.
I mean, you mentioned there about forming, you know, your own studio as the next stage after kind of doing that freelance work and doing a lot of work pretty extensively, like within the walls of Nintendo. You went on to found a company called Vitae. When you started Vitae, what was it that prompted the decision to kind of go that direction to found your own development studio?
I didn't really have an intention to make a company, I think. It was just Nintendo, so, you know, we've got this game, it's going to be easier if there was a team, so I made a team, made a company to run the team.
I mean, in the early days of that company, you directed Rock and Roll Climber, which I was keen to at least try out, but the Wii Shop has been completely switched off for a number of years. And you were also involved in Theta, a puzzle game for the DS, which, again, I would have played, but it was a Japanese exclusive. I don't have access to it. But shortly after that, you moved on to develop perhaps the highest profile game of Vitae's run, Steel Diver, for the 3DS. And I think that was a fascinating release because it was a launch title for the 3DS in the US, and thus was some people's first exposure to the unique opportunities afforded by stereoscopic 3D. I don't know how popular it was in the UK. It came out a few months after the console first launched, so I picked it up a few months down the line. But for anyone that never played it, it's a submarine game. You control your little sub, not directly. Instead of operating it using the face buttons and analog slider, you've got the touchscreen to kind of manipulate different controls of the submarine. Stages are quite short, and eventually, in essence, the game becomes a sort of arcade time trial style racer almost, where you're attempting to shave seconds off your best times while you work through the little cave systems and past obstacles and whatever. It also had a really lovely, I guess, like a mini game section where the top screen is like a periscope viewer and the console's gyro sensor is used to aim your shots. And I've got really fond memories of playing that game on like a spinny chair and just feeling like an absolute king when kind of taking down approaching enemies from all sides. But bearing in mind this launched as quite a high-profile title for the 3DS and was kind of co-developed and then published by Nintendo, how did that relationship come about, Giles? Were you still just in close contact with the people within Nintendo because of Argonaut and working on Doshin and stuff like that?
You know, after Theta and whatnot, we ended up sort of getting closer and closer to Nintendo. Theta and Steel Diver, that was 2 published games, but in between those 2, we had like so many prototypes of games that we worked on that were never released or sort of put onto something else or whatever. So we ended up being almost like a sort of extension of EAD.
Yeah.
So that's how we ended up doing Steel Diver. But Steel Diver was actually a demo from one of Sugiyama-san's demos for the original DS. And we took that idea and we sort of, you know, redid the entire thing. But again, a bit like Doshin, we sort of took the basis of the demo and just redid it from scratch, with much nicer sort of physics and everything like that for the DS, not the 3DS.
Yeah.
So we had it finished and done on the DS, and it was working really nicely. It was going to be a DSiWare title, I think, you know, one of the download things.
Yeah.
But it scored really, really highly within Nintendo. I think at that point Nintendo had this sort of internal scoring system where if a game wasn't very good, it would go to DSiWare. But if it got over a certain score, it would become an actual proper packaged product. And our, you know, Steel Diver, the DS Steel Diver scored really, really well. So they said, all right, let's make it more than just a DSiWare game. Let's make it a proper packaged game. So we did that. And then right at the end of that, they suddenly announced the 3DS. Or not 3DS, it was the new DS hardware. So they say, all right, rather than launching on DS, can you launch it on this new piece of hardware? So we did it for that. So I had this really long history where it was just getting promoted every couple of years or every year, whatever, to the next biggest thing. But actually, you were just reminding me. So we had the original development boards for the 3DS were these big sort of square, bare-boned PCB type things with 2 screens, one sort of wide screen, literally just printed on the circuit board, and then another screen underneath it, printed on the circuit board. So that's what we were using to develop on for, you know, a good few months, whatever. And we had no idea that the top screen was 3D for like 6 months of development. And Nintendo kept it secret from the developers as well. And then they basically, one day they sent us a little sort of email or note saying, if you poke a number into this register here, the screen will become 3D. And we thought it was like a joke, and we did it. And then suddenly we looked at the screen, and it was actually 3D, which is
incredible.
Which was really cool, because we'd never heard of lenticular displays, whatever, up until that point.
No.
We had absolutely no idea that was what it was all about. So yeah, I do remember that day. It was quite cool.
I mean, we've talked quite a lot on this show about the 3DS in recent times, because I had like a sudden urge a few months back to pick up a new console. I just wanted to experience it again. And it's still a lovely piece of tech. I have a real fondness for the 3DS.
The 3DS is one of my favourite Nintendo hardwares by far.
Yeah.
It's just such a nicely rounded package, I think.
Yeah.
And the actual 3D screen just works so well on some games, like Steel Diver, because you get a very sort of limited diorama type sort of feeling where there's a couple of inches of display behind the display. Yeah. Not a lot, just some depth.
Yeah.
I was never a big fan of the actual sort of flying around 3D type games that try to come out of the screen.
Yeah.
Because they always seem to go too far. But I really like the sort of really constrained 3D games.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those are so effective. And the ones that are most effective, like you said, are the ones that actually use it more sparingly or subtly, just to enhance the experience. And there's games that I even play now. Like recently, I picked up the fantastic game, The Messenger, and that's a game that I just thought, I just love this, just to have a bit of depth. It would make it so nice. Like playing Shovel Knight on 3DS is the best way of playing that game.
Yeah.
Or I mean, any sort of 2D platformer just benefits so much from that added depth. It's lovely, so lovely.
The only design flaw with 3DS, I thought, was everybody used to turn the 3D off because it used to shorten the battery life.
Yeah.
So my kids used to play 3DS all the time, but they'd never use the 3D because it was, their number one concern was how much battery life they had left most of the time.
Thinking about Steel Diver now in 2021, it's a very different sort of game, and it launched at a strange time when the industry was pulling in all different directions. It's quite a methodical, considered game, and I know for some people it got quite a mixed response when it initially came out, but I feel like you probably have quite a lot of fondness for it. Like, how do you feel about it now, over a decade or so on from it initially releasing?
It's one of my favourite games, but I can see how uncommercial it is, or it feels, because it's just it's so slow and unexciting sometimes.
That's how you sell it at the pitch meeting. A very unexciting game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's how they sold it in the adverts here. It was classed as being a game to sort of relax and play slowly, not a sort of hyper exciting game. And that's exactly what it is, because you're controlling a submarine that reacts really slowly anyway.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get many sort of sudden movements or anything like that. It's just a completely different style of game, I think. And that's why I kind of like it, because it's just so different from other games.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, just by its nature, it's going to be, like you said, a bit slower. It's not like you could release a game about racing canal barges and expect that to be, to be like F-Zero or something.
Top speed of 7 miles an hour.
When you launch a missile, you dial in the angle almost, and you wait until it gets there and you fire it, and then 10 seconds later you might have hit the target or not. And it's kind of exactly how a real submarine would work, but obviously it doesn't make for a very exciting game. But if you're into sort of simulations like that, I think it's good.
Yeah.
I mean, hats off to Nintendo, because that was the period of time that they were willing to sort of do those kind of games. There was a period where they'd take these big risks just to see what would happen, kind of thing.
So moving on from, I mean, your journey through games is fantastic, because it can be entirely traced through the development of 3D, going from the very sort of early stages of 3D on a 16-bit console through to the N64, and then through to stereoscopic 3D, and then from stereoscopic 3D to virtual reality with your latest endeavour, which is Carve Snowboarding, billed as a spiritual successor to 1080, and a very successful title in the growing catalogue of the Oculus. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have an Oculus Quest 2, which I haven't had as much use of in a fair little while, since we have had our lovely baby daughter. But I did strap it on for a few hours to play Carve, and it really is. It's a very smooth experience. I mean, I was worried at first, because even though I'm not particularly prone to motion sickness when playing VR stuff, I knew that I was going to be going quite fast and possibly, falling over, smashing into trees, stuff like that. And I was a little worried that I would find the game a bit nauseating. But I think the fact that you have very clear grounding of where you are in the game, which is, your snowboard, that gives you a really clear base, so it allows you to have a very smooth experience. And I didn't have any wobbly moments at all. Well, I mean, obviously I did on the snowboard, but not in real life. I think it's very, very successfully done from that perspective. And I mean, one of the things that I often ask myself when playing a game that has a particular I'm going to say gimmick, but even though like VR is an established area of gaming in its own right, I've seen VR used as a gimmick. You know, I've seen it be crowbarred into other games just for the sake of it and it not really working at all. So I thought, you know, okay, well, I've played snowboarding games before, you know, like on the Saturn and the GameCube and the PS4. Why do I need to play one in VR? What am I going to gain from this experience that I haven't had before? The answer is an incredible thrill. You know, it feels something akin to those like simulators you sit in at the arcades that give you the sensation of going on like a roller coaster or doing a big ski jump, but you're in control of it. It's not passive, you know, it's purely active, and it totally transforms the sensation of what it means to play a snowboarding game or any sort of I guess sort of, you know, racing game. I mean, unlike a driving game, you know, you're totally exposed. You are the vehicle. And it just feels fantastic to have a very real sense of control over your movements and being able to steer and jump very easily and organically. It's just, it's excellent. It really, really is. I think, you know, one of the hardest things to do in VR is to make it feel natural, and that requires an awful lot of creative thinking and then executing extraordinarily well programmed design to make it go, it feels like I should control the game like this, and it works because everybody's going to be slightly different on that sense. You know, everybody's going to have a slightly different sort of natural place to control VR from, but certainly for me it worked brilliantly. You know, I even managed to pull off some good tricks and grinds on a few runs, and I think that's the area of the game where I think it differs from a traditional console experience, because like pulling off tricks in a sports game like this on a normal controller, it's just the same as putting in button combos in a beat-em-up game. You know, it becomes more about that and stringing together absurdly long chains of tricks and less about what it feels like to be doing the sport itself. You know, and of course, precisely that is why like the Tony Hawk's games are so successful. You know, they're totally unrealistic and they lean into the arcadey nature of the setup that they've established. But I mean, very, very wisely, it's an area of the game that is handled very realistically in Carve, because otherwise I think it would give you that disconnect that ruins so many good VR experiences. You know, you can pull off a few good jumps in a run, get a good grab and a spin. You can probably get a couple of good grinds to maybe pick up a couple of collectibles, but it all feels very achievable and tangible. And in many ways, it sort of like takes the pressure off, like massive score chasing runs on Tony Hawk's. I mean, having said that, you know, there are the sort of score chasing freestyle modes in the game are there, and I haven't properly tackled some of those. So it's possible that I will have to up my game a bit to get some of those achievements. But it feels like a game that I will get better at with practice. You know, as the movements become more natural, as my body strengthens up as well, because like it's surprisingly tiring to play. Like you sort of have this like tension you have in your body to keep your balance and turn precisely. And that's really exciting as well, to think that I can grow in this game, and the game, well, not only allows me to do that, but it rewards me for it as well. I think it's an excellent achievement, and it's definitely one of the most successful VR experiences I've had. So I mean, what was it that led you to return to snowboarding after obviously having worked on 1080? What made you go, you know what, I think it's time to get back to the slopes?
Well, thanks for that. I mean, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Actually, you remind me that a lot of people have been saying it's really relaxing.
It is.
Just chilling out with an ambient mixtape and just going down the slopes. I kind of get that, but that definitely wasn't. I guess we didn't really design it for that, but that's definitely a thing that I've noticed playing it, and other people notice playing it. But yeah, I mean, I guess it started with the DK1, the original Oculus headset from 7 or 8 years ago. We got a few of those, and I thought, I have to make a snowboarding game for this. So I just made some prototypes like many years ago, and just tried various ideas out. And every Bit Summit we had, it's like a big trade show in Kyoto.
Yeah, right.
I'd show a little demo and I'd get some feedback and go back for another year. It was a very, very sort of slow burn, part-time type of thing. Probably took, 5 years of just playing around with ideas to see what worked and what didn't work. And by that time, we'd already done a few VR titles at Chuhai, or the Bitte Backrimmer. So we knew what worked and what didn't work with VR in general.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it feels comfortable compared with a lot of other games, because we know what makes people feel sick in VR now.
Yeah.
Quite well. It's a combination of things like rotating the camera when your head isn't moving. That's probably the number one thing. Sudden jerks of movement, or it's going up and down too fast and stuff like that. Put it all together and you get a vomit comet kind of thing where it's one of the early prototypes had you could ski, you could sled and snowmobile. The skiing was fine, snowboarding was fine, but sledding and snowmobile was awful because you can't get around the fact that you have to rotate the thing you're on. If you're sitting on a thing in VR, it has to rotate, and when it rotates, you have to rotate the view.
Yeah.
And just that simple thing alone, you just can't use it in VR because it just makes anybody feel sick.
Yeah.
The way we get around it in Carve is by never rotating the camera.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. So then, I thought, well, so we've got that limitation. How do I make it so that you can actually control the snowboard without rotating the camera like that? We tried things like sort of tying sensors to your legs so that you could control the ball with your legs and stuff like that. On paper, it would seem like you could make a game where your legs are controlling the ball, but what actually happens is you just get frustrated because you don't have the dexterity in your legs that you need for a snowboard. But one of the things I noticed, in snowboarding in real life is how much you use your hands, or your arms rather, for balance and just general controlling where your board goes. I've been snowboarding for 20 years or whatever. It's quite a natural thing to sort of you put your hands where your board is going to go. So I thought, well, let's, rather than just forget about the legs and forget about everything else, just use your hands and just get the snowboard sort of matching your hands or get matching where your feet are. And I did that and it just worked. I was just sort of blown away about how well it felt. And then after that, it was just a matter of sort of figuring out how to do jumps and the edge control. So a lot of the early prototypes had the edge control full on. I don't know if you tried it with the full edge control.
No, not yet, no.
Well, basically, it's in snowboarding, it's all about the edge. It's all about sort of how much grip the snowboard has on the snow. And that's how you turn, and that's how you do sort of any kind of movement in snowboarding. For a long time, that was the only control you had, was basically you could control the edge and the rotation. But I found out quite early on that was too much for most people. Just controlling the rotation was enough for most people.
Yeah.
So that we put that into an option for more advanced players.
Well, that's cool. I look forward to having a go at that.
It's basically a culmination of many years of just trial and error and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work.
It really is very, very successful, and I'm looking forward to playing more of it. I was also fortunate enough to be able to lend my Oculus to Minty to give the game a go himself. And, I mean, for a start, I knew you had him sold on it as soon as he discovered you could go and pet the dog that is in the cabin you start in. I mean, that literally ticks every box in Minty's game qualities list. He was so happy. He saw the dog. I left the room to go and do something. I came back and he was still playing with the dog. But, Minty, how did you get on with it outside of that beautiful and fulfilling moment?
Oh, before he starts there, can I just add that? So it was my idea to put the dog in.
Excellent.
And everybody was against it. There were so many points. There were so many points where people said, we don't need a dog, it's going to add too much, it's too confusing, or I don't like dogs, or whatever the excuse was.
Who are these people?
And it was me that put my foot down and saying, no, we have to have a dog.
Good.
And it has to be pettable.
Yep.
and cute. And it's not the cutest dog, it's a bit of a mongrel, but that, it doesn't matter.
He's lovely. And I must say, I mean, it genuinely makes for a better gaming experience, having little touches like that. Does it do anything? No. Does it make you feel better? Absolutely. It's lovely.
Most games should have that.
Yes.
Basically.
You're preaching to the choir here, certainly when it comes to Minty. How did you get on with it, Minty?
Yeah, I had a huge amount of fun with it, actually. I'd say it was probably my first full body VR experience, if that makes sense, because I played a bit of Tetris Effect back on the old PSVR, which is just, sat down with a controller. You've got the Tetris board in front of you, and it's lovely. It's very nice. But this was my very first game where you could sort of turn your head and you can just look at everything. it was really remarkable, actually. So Jonathan gave me the headset as you're in the cabin, the log cabin, and to just sort of go from my sort of beige living room to this to this beautiful, warm, wooden walled place, fire crackling, like a marshmallow gun there that you can sort of pick up and shoot things with, the dog over there. It was immediately immersive and really, really wonderful. Really loved it. I often think back to this sort of technology, and I used to go to a lot of stage technology trade shows when I worked in theatre, and you'd go around all the booths and you'd have sort of people demonstrating their new tiny lightweight carabiner by having like 3 people hanging off it at the same time, sort of really showing off what everything can do. You'd have people using the new soundboards and everything, letting you have demos. This feels like those sort of almost unattainably futuristic bits of kit. But it's just a little thing that you put on your head in your living room and you're transported to a completely different world. It's just incredible. And for a snowboarding game, we've said, it's one of those extreme sports that always seem so radical and so cool. But this is just a really lovely, relaxing experience for sure. I just loved how intuitive it was. It was just so gentle to play, and you can really get a decent bit of speed. It's got a gentle, exhilarating quality to it. Although I didn't really ask Jonathan what the controls were in any real detail, so unfortunately I have pulled a muscle in my neck. But once that loosens up a little, I am going to enjoy a little bit more of it. Because I want to see what happens when I collect all of the symbols or whatever, or grab the front of the board and do tricks and that sort of thing.
Once you're out of the wheelchair.
I mean, I was surprised because I'd already done the tutorial when you start the game, and I wasn't sure how to navigate you to replay that, because it's one of the only downsides of the Oculus is the fact that, like with PSVR, somebody who's sat with you can watch what you're doing on the TV, whereas I can't see what Minty's doing when he's got the headset on, so I couldn't be like, go through the menu, see if you can find the tutorial.
You can with the casting to a phone thing, which is actually really cool.
Well,
don't know if you've seen that with the Quest.
Didn't know you could do that. That's excellent.
Yeah, it's a really cool feature.
Oh.
You can basically see what the other guy is seeing from just with the phone.
Well, there we go. Well, that's that problem solved. So I was actually really surprised at how well you took to the controls. That's a real credit to you, Giles, and the fact that you didn't have a tutorial and you just organically controlled it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you took out your lampshade when you were trying to pull off a trick, but
oh yeah.
I mean, the goal was not to have any tutorial, but when we were testing it, it was kind of obvious that people just couldn't really get past that first step. That's why we have the tutorial. Yeah, but if it was my choice, we wouldn't have anything. We would just be, all right, now you're on the slopes. Now what do? You figure out. Kind of thing. It would be that kind of thing.
Mm.
But that's also why we don't really have an explanation for how to do the tricks, because I wanted people to just sort of discover the tricks rather than just being told what to do.
Mm. And it's really satisfying when you pull it off.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things I hated but one of the things I wasn't keen on 1080 was the sort of the checklist of tricks to do.
Yeah.
And you just go through them one by one, almost like a sort of a task list of things to do. I wasn't keen on that.
Mm.
So I like the idea of just having everything there in the game, but it's up to you to kind of discover it in whatever manner you want, whether it's via Discord chat or via videos on YouTube or whatever. Mm. It's more of a sort of a freestyle way of discovering stuff. I kind of like that idea.
That's lovely. So, congratulations on an excellent achievement with Carve, and inevitably, as soon as somebody produces one thing, the following question is, what's next? So, what is next for you? Are you sticking with VR? Are you maybe returning to riff on some of your other previous gaming ideas? Maybe doing an update of Doshin the Giant to play in VR or Star Fox?
All of that, apart from maybe the Star Fox thing. No, actually, by the time this comes out, you would have seen that we have a Playdate game coming out. Actually,
fantastic! Yeah, that's the second Playdate developer we've spoken to now.
It's bizarre, isn't
exciting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We spoke with the chaps of a company called RNG Party, who made a typing game called Backspace Buken, and they're developing their next game for the Playdate. I'm very excited for that handheld. I think it looks absolutely stunning. Oh yeah, tell us more.
So 6 months ago, or maybe more than that, like a year ago, I took a couple of weeks off from the snowboarding game to make a little playdate game. But it's a really cool playdate game. We showed it to a Panic and they said, well, this is really cool. Let's have it on the season pass first run type thing. So that's great, and that should be coming out whenever it comes out.
I'm very, very excited to see what you've made. Are you making use of the innovative crank on the console?
Well, you can't not do. You can't make a game for the Playdate and ignore that wonderful thing. It's interesting. It's similar to Carve almost, where we designed the game for VR. Not we don't have a game and put it into VR. We make the game for VR. It's a similar thing for the Playdate thing. We made the game specifically to use the crank rather than coming up with an idea and then putting the crank into it.
Yeah.
Which I love. I love the limitation of the device. The fact you've got a black and white screen. It's a really nice screen, but quite low res. There's only so many things you can do with it, but that forces you to think more about the gameplay than the graphics and whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really like. And it's such a nice machine to develop on. It's you have a Mac. You've got a simulator on a Mac. You can work on it in a coffee shop or on a plane, whatever. It's just glorious. It's a lovely machine.
That's so nice. I'm really excited about it. I think it's a fantastically innovative direction to take games. Obviously, when you have limitations, then that totally exercises your creative problem solving, and that's when you get proper innovation. You get new things, and the idea of just the crank is great. That's really, really fun. I can't wait to see all the ways that's going to be used, and like you said, just kind of maximizing the potential of just black and white, simple sprite design, very simple design. It's got to be very, very focused and very clear for it to work, and I think I can't wait. That's very exciting to hear that you're working on that as well, and I think certainly when the Playdate comes out, we'll definitely do a new special on it.
Yeah, for sure.
May try and get you back for that.
A Playdate special would be great. I think it's going to be really popular. I love the thing.
Oh, how exciting.
But apart from that, we're going to carry on with VR, definitely.
Excellent.
As a main thing. VR is the future for games, I think, but we're also doing things like the Playdate and other flat screen SKUs and stuff. So
lovely.
A bit of everything.
VR is I hope where the future of gaming's going, because now that people are really starting to get used to how it works.
So it goes from 2D to 3D flat screen, and then VR or actual proper 3D is the natural progression of that.
Yeah.
And where it takes, you can imagine a future where you don't have headsets, you just have like a little sort of dot that you put on the side of your head, a bit like that episode of Black Mirror.
Yeah, and nothing can go wrong.
You can imagine a future where you don't have TVs or in your room. You just have this little thing that you can project whatever you want wherever in actual space. That's going to be the future, isn't it? There's no doubt about that. So whatever way you look at it, VR is the future.
Getting the Oculus and being able to play VR without wires attached to a console, that was a real game changer.
The Quest is a game changer.
It's extraordinary. And the Quest 2 as well, with its higher resolution, in my opinion, without a doubt, the best way to experience VR. And it's great that we've got developers like you and some other fantastic developers really sort of looking into the future with it and how to maximize it and how to push it and take things to the next level. And I can't wait to see what you do next. What a treat it's been to talk with you.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great.
So there we go. This has been a fantastic trip through your life, Giles, and thank you very much for sharing so many great anecdotes and memories of your time going through the video games industry. If people want to keep up to date with what you're working on, Giles, what is the best way for people to do that?
I guess Twitter. It's quite easy to get to me at Twitter. I'm just at Giles, Giles.
Nice. Got in there early.
That's probably the easiest way.
Yeah, that's like phase 1 Twitter name.
I think I was actually using number 20 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
One of the early testers.
And you can get in touch with us on our social media platforms. We're on facebook.com/Our3Cents, Instagram at O3C Podcast. Go to YouTube, search for Our3Cents. You can find all of our video content there. You can sometimes catch us streaming live on Twitch at O3C Podcast. Do get in touch with us, chat to us about any of these games that we've talked about, what you're making of Carve if you're playing that. Tell us what else you're playing. We always love to hear from you. You can even reach out to us individually as well if you want to take us to task on any of our opinions opinions or ask us anything specifically, I'm on Twitter at Jonathan Dunn.
I am at Chaz_Hodges.
I'm Clement_Boo.
And if you're really enjoying what we're doing, do please check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/our3cents. There's loads of fantastic perks available for several sort of tiers of pledging. There's full bonus episodes. There's some fantastic ones on there, including a special with the legendary vocalist TJ Davis, who features on the soundtrack to Sonic R and Metropolis Street Racer. Some fantastic other things as well. There's deleted scenes and outtakes. There's even custom artwork and access to the Patreon exclusive Discord channel that Giles is now a part of. So you can, if you want to subscribe to be a Patreon, you may well be able to have a chat with Giles on there. And please do join us next week, where we will be talking about our number 2s. That doesn't sound right. Please join us next week when Chris will be telling you what his second favourite video game of all time is.
Oh my goodness.
So close to the end.
2.
So close to the end. We can't wait.
And now a word from our sponsor. And now a word from our sponsor. And now a word from our sponsor.
On Apocrypals, we talk about the parts of the Bible that a lot of people skip over.
Like the wizard battles,
The angel jacuzzis,
a goat full of sins,
500 drunk elephants,
and a man named Porky Party.
and yes, that's all really in there. All this and more on Apocrypals every other week on the Greenlit Podcast Network.
Welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we explore the fun side of Magic the Gathering. I'm your host, Shivam Putt, and each week we delve into everything from casual formats to explorations of creatures and card types to interviews with designers of the game. At Casual Magic, we believe that it just isn't Magic without the Gathering. Come along and play!